Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. It's your host LupusX. Today bring you guys some more information down for you guys on the 5 different nation of cruisers. So if you guys have been asking questions mainly about, okay, so I'm not sure if the cruiser line I should go for next, and I'm not sure if this cruiser line is best fit for me in terms of the way I play the game. Well, all this is meant to do in terms of this video is just give you guys kind of a clearer concept as to the main things of what you're looking for when you're playing these lines. Now, this is not meant to be an in-depth review, but it will kind of give you guys a good idea as to what you're looking for when you step into these 5 different nations. So with the start off, without further ado, we're going to get started off with the American cruiser line itself. And the American cruiser line is most notable at the Pensacola, where you start losing your torpedoes in exchange for guns and secondaries. And this is exactly where this kind of the line comes into its somewhat of its own. It stops basically playing the normal cruiser with torpedoes mindset and actually goes into much more of a DPM and much more of an air control and area control type of benefits. So with that, you also contain pretty great AA for this line, only beaten out by the British AA at certain higher tiers depending on the ship. But for the most part, you come with great AA, great DPM in order to use it. You come with high arc shells, meaning you're able to arc and fire over islands and fire from cover, unlike other ship classes. So you can also use your AP to a high advantage there, as well as you're able to play support like. These are very good fleet ships. Honestly, they're very good in terms of playing tournaments and competitions in the future. So if you're looking for possible tourney ships, this is the type of ships you want to look into. They're not all that great for pub matches because of their ability of not having torps as a shock factor. But if you can play them with a competent team and play them correctly by staying next to your team, you can definitely get things done. And with that, you're also trying to play down your DPM by setting fires, by also using your DPM and high abilities to fire at a high rate, basically, to keep other targets out of their zones, making you probably one of the most deadlier ships to brawl with in close range. But close to mid-range is really where you want to keep that mindset at, and make sure you're staying close to your fleet as well. You're not able to lone wolf in those type of ships. But I will teach you guys one of the ships that is able to lone wolf, the Japanese cruisers. And these are probably the lone wolves, probably the most crutch ships in the game. And what I call them like clutch ships, because really they're probably the only cruiser class that can basically fill up any position in the game. They have the firepower that is somewhat in comparison to a battleship, and they also have the firepower and torpedoes that is somewhat in comparison to a destroyer, meaning they can kind of carry all the best of all the worlds along with them, making them 10 times deadly. The only thing about them is they do carry somewhat weak armor, so they're not really meant to brawl all that much as other ship lines. Can they possibly get away with it? Is it workable? At times, cruiser v cruiser, yes it is, but depending on the cruiser, you don't always want to brawl with other ships, and you want to kind of play your detection range and stealth to your best of your ability. Using your HE is very important here, because you can also set fires by getting people to blow their damage cons and getting permafires and permafloods. Using those two interchangeable ideas together is usually what's going to get you those big damage numbers and possibly some witherer medals when you start getting down to higher tiers. Keeping in mind that, like I said before, this is definitely a clutch type of ship line. So if you definitely are the type of person where you don't want to always be relying on your team to kind of pull out the wins for you, and you definitely want to make things happen on your own, then this is definitely the ship line you probably want to invest in, because of its ability to do so much damage and do it in such burst factors that makes it so much of a relentless and devastating line to deal with for your opponents. And now moving on to the British line, and this is much more of the quieter, concealed line. There are definitely opportunists in this line. They kind of work like the Americans in where they center around area control, but honestly they are more specialized to DD deletion and also some area control factors in there, and also concealment. They have the best concealment of any cruisers in game, meaning that if you play your concealment correctly, you can also get away with a whole lot of different things on bigger capital ships, such as using your torpedoes and single fire torpedoes to let them down and everything else. Now, you don't have the flooding chance of Japanese ships, and you don't quite have the range, but you do have a pretty decent range and pretty good DPM on your reload of your torpedoes, meaning you can still be pretty deadly up the Neptune and Minnow at high tiers, as well as the Edinburgh, which also has become probably one of my personal favorites over time. So yes, these ships do carry some bit of great torpedo range and pretty great torpedo arcs as well, but at the same time, it's also worth noting that they're not brawler ships. They're definitely opportunists in every way and sense of the word. So if you're trying to brawl with other ships, you're asking to go back to port very, very early. So keep in mind, you do have great traverse, you do have great mobility and great agility, but keep in mind your armor is also weak as well, so you don't want to engage bigger capital ships. You want to make use of ambush and opportunist-like aspects of the game using your detection. These are probably the closest thing next to destroyers next to the Japanese line that plays their stealth and plays their stealth effectively. So knowing how to play your detection and knowing how to play your stealth is very pinnacle for playing this line effectively. Now, with that being said, I also enjoy the single fire torps coming out of this ship because always, it is always one perfect thing to land all 4 torps on one thing at a pretty good distance. Keeping in mind, you only have AP for this line, so it does make you a little bit useless sometimes against capital ships until you get APCS later on with the 5% AP penetration. However, if you learn how to aim at the bow and the stern of the ship where the armor is not located, you can actually get away with some pretty good pins and close to higher tiers. Keep in mind, your main focus is going to be DD deletion, so make sure you're only aiming at those capital ships after you finish up cleaning up the battlefield, because trying to fight battleships on your own is asking to go back to port pretty soon and pretty early. But if you do clear up the DDs early, that will make it so much easier on your team and on your other battleships to help you fight the other fights that you have to do. And now on to the German line, probably one of my most favorite lines, and starting off with the York, which is probably one of the more quirky classes. It's the one where you use HE spam over the typical AP spam of the Germans. Now with this ship, you also get the higher caliber guns. You get 2 10mm guns on the York compared to the 203s and the higher tiers of the rest of the German line. So yes, you get 7mm better on the York than any other ship in the line. Yes, that is correct. You do get 7mm better. And with the Admiral Hipper, which is also one of the probably staple ships of the line as well, it is somewhat foreshadowed a little bit by its Eugen predecessor in terms of its premium, but in fact it's still a solid ship all around, even though you don't see it as much as you see its sister ship, the Eugen. And with this class is mainly graded AP damage, so it also contains pretty good AP in comparison with the Americans. Probably one of the best in the game so far in terms of its AP penetration and workable mechanics. Now, keep in mind with this line as well, you want to utilize plunging fire with dealing with DDs. So that means you want to keep back to about 7 to 8 kilometer distance and allow your guns to kind of plunge the DDs in order to do your full damage rolls on the DDs. But you also come with sonar as well, and you're the only tech tree line to come with sonar. Even though this is so much a close range proximity spotter for DDs, it still makes you somewhat a valuable ally to the rest of your ships, so make sure you're playing support and play it well. Now, also like the Japanese ships, you can kind of lone wolf a little bit in the German ships since you're meant to be a brawler with other cruiser classes, and you can bully them pretty well as well. But keep in mind, you also want to play close to your team as well, as you cannot do everything on your own. You do have pretty good torpedoes as well, which have great arcs on them, but remember, those torpedoes are mainly in more of defensive fashion. You can use them in every now and then for offensive maneuvers, but I find myself more using the German torps as a deterrent more so than an attacking factor. And this is the game in the Hindenburg so far, as we are just basically using those 12 203mm cannons with those great penetration the Germans have to basically wreck whatever targets we see in front of us and do what we have to do. These things are definitely cruiser bullies, and they can fight battleships too, given some support, but they're probably not as independent as a Japanese line can be. And last but not least, probably the most, I would say, the most quirkier lines of them all, it is the Russian cruiser line itself. These are basically, in my opinion, more like pocket battleships in a sense, in terms of not even pocket battleships, let's say budget battleships. Their armor is not very all that great at all, but they have great laser-like guns. In fact, they are probably some of the best dispersed guns I've ever seen in the game. And dispersion, all that means is basically how well the shells are clumped together in game. And they have probably the most laser-like accuracy out of any guns in game. Keep in mind, they do have low arc systems, meaning it is going to be a little harder to start those fires, but you easily make that up with your DPM up at lower tiers. When you start getting to the dumb discoy, that's exactly when you start getting your 180mm shells back, and you can start actually firing upon battleships with precise aims and so on and so forth by getting your full rolls and so on. These are elite cruisers that are meant to fire at range and engage ships at range. These are not brawlers by any shape of the word, and brawling in these ships is asking to go back to port as well. Think of these guys like snipers and second line battleships. Honestly, that's exactly how these guys play, is second line battleships to some extent. They have the ability to use their DPM of cruisers, but yet and still they don't have the armor to really make things work at closer ranges. So staying at distance and being able to see the shots coming so that way you can maneuver in Russian ships, it's what's going to save you a lot of grief later on, because most of the time you're basically riding a floating citadel, and there really is no way to really stop the citadels every now and then. But of course, the Russian line excels at those sniper-like capabilities, and with those sniper-like capabilities comes a lot of different pros and cons to it. with that, like I said before, those flatter arcs sometimes makes it a little harder to set fires on ships because you don't have that straight arc to land on the deck. It most likely will land on the armor. So it will take a while for you to kind of get used to the aiming systems there, but you guys can just see the beautiful dispersion it has as it basically goes exactly where I'm actually aiming it from. And with that nice shell velocity, it basically gets there almost in no time at all. And it's beautiful, beautiful, beautifully done HE shell characteristics, as I'm basically launching 12 shells every time with the great DPM you guys see there at the shores at tier 7. So yes, these are the lines and this is how they all work. So hopefully guys, it's helped you guys kind of get a good idea as to what ship lines you may want to invest in the future. If you guys have any questions, comments, or anything else you'd like to add, definitely always speak to me in the comments section. I'll be happy to answer any other questions and so on and so forth. And hopefully we'll get another more in-depth line review of each of the lines maybe in the near future. Until then, guys, I'll be seeing you out in the open seas. It's your boy Lupus X signing out.